said. "Good afternoon," said William, in a business-like fashion. "Has Robert ever asked you to marry him?" "No. What a peculiar question. He hasn't." William adopted a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, he's deep in love with you." Marian's eyes danced. "Why can't he ask me, then?" "He's shy. He's always shy when he's in love. Do marry him, please, just for kindness. I'm trying to be kind. That's why I'm here. If you don't be engaged to him soon, he'll be stone dead. He'll die of love, like what they do in tales, and then you'll probably get hung for murder." "Oh, good heavens," said Miss Dexter. "Well, I hope you won't, but if you kill Robert with not getting engaged to him, probably you will be. So will you marry him, then?" She dimpled. "Certainly, if he wants me to." Perhaps," said William, after a slight pause, "perhaps you better write it in a letter, 'cause he'd like as not believe me." With eyes dancing and lips quivering with suppressed laughter, Miss Dexter sat down at her writing table. "Dear Robert," she wrote, "at William's request, I promise to be engaged to you and to marry you whenever you like. Yours sincerely, Marian Dexter." When William reached home, Ethel was just showing out Mrs. Helm, a tall, stern-looking lady whom he knew by sight. William followed Ethel into the dining-room where his mother was. "What did she want, dear?" said Mrs. Brown. "Go and wash your hands, William." "She wanted me to go to her house this evening," said Ethel, "but I told her I couldn't because I was going to the Morrisons. Thank heaven I had an excuse." William unfortunately missed the last sentence, as, still inspired by high ideals of virtue, he'd gone at once upstairs to wash his hands. While he splashed about in the hand-basin, an idea suddenly occurred to him. That was how he'd help Ethel. Directly after lunch, he set off to Mrs. Morrison's house. Mrs. Morrison, large and fat and comfortable-looking, was rather bewildered as she met William's frowning gaze. "I've come from Ethel. She's sorry she can't come tonight." Mrs. Morrison's cheerful countenance fell. "Oh, the girls will be disappointed," she said. "They saw her this morning, and she said she was looking forward to it." "She's been took ill since then," explained William. "Oh, dear. Nothing serious, I hope?" William considered. If it wasn't serious, she might expect Ethel to recover by the evening. "I'm afraid it is." "Oh, dear, dear. What is it?" William thought over all the complaints he knew of. Then he remembered hearing the gardener talking to the housemaid about something serious his cousin had got. "Epilepsy," said William. "What?" screamed Mrs. Morrison. William wondered whether it were possible to increase this favourable impression. "Well, the doctor thinks she's got a bit of consumption, too, but he's not quite sure." He left Mrs. Morrison still gasping. The next visit was easier. He simply told Mrs. Helm's maid at the door to tell Mrs. Helm that Ethel would be able to come tonight after all, thank you very much. When he returned home, it was almost dinner time. His mother and Ethel and Robert were still out. Cook met him with a lugubrious face. "Now, Master William," she said, "can I trust you to give a message to your ma?" "Yes, Cook," said William, virtuously. "Me cold and me head's that bad I can't stand on me feet no longer. Your ma said if I'd leave things all ready to dish up, I might go and rest before dinner if I felt bad. Tell her I haven't made no pudding, but I've opened a bottle of stewed pears." "All right," said William. He wandered into the kitchen. Several saucepans simmered on the gas stove. Suddenly, William had yet another brilliant idea. His father hated cold stewed fruit. He often said so. William would make a proper pudding for his father. All the gas rings were being used. He'd better get one clear for his pudding. There were 2 small saucepans, each containing dark brown stuff. They might as well be together, thought William, with a businesslike frown. He had a moment's misgiving as the mingled smell of gravy and coffee arose from the mixture. He opened the cookery book at random, at the puddings. "Beat 3 eggs together," it said. Well, he'd seen Cook cracking eggs into a basin. It looked quite easy. He broke an egg. The shell fell neatly onto the table, and the egg slithered down William onto the floor. He tried another, and the same thing happened. He went on breaking eggs, each time with the same result, till none remained, and only then did he relinquish his hopes of making a pudding. But his thirst for practical virtue was not yet sated. Surely he could carry the things into the dining-room so that they could have dinner as soon as they came in. In the oven was a chicken on a large dish, which burned William's fingers severely as he took it out. Just as he stood with the dish in his hands, he heard his mother and Robert come in. There was no room on the kitchen table, so he put the chicken on the floor and went to find Robert in the drawing-room. Without a word, William handed the note to his brother. Robert read it. He went first red, then pale, then a wild look came into his eyes. "Marian Dexter?" he cried. "You're in love with her, aren't you?" said William. "You've been writing poems to her." "Not to Marian Dexter," yelled Robert. "She's an old woman. She's nearly 25. It's Marian Hatherley. "Well, how was I to know?" said William in a voice of irritation. "I thought I was helping. You should put their surnames in the poems." Robert was reading and rereading the note.
"My God, I'm engaged to Marian Dexter, chained to her for life when I love another. I shall have to marry her now."
"Robert, dear," said Mrs. Brown, "I'm sure that all you have to do is to go to Miss Dexter and explain."
"Explain?" said Robert wildly. "How can I explain? She's accepted me. How can any man of chivalry refuse to marry a woman who... Oh, it's too much. It's the ruin of all my hopes. William has simply spoilt my life."
"Well, I was trying to help," said William, as he fled towards the door, where he collided with Ethel. "Mother," she said angrily as she entered, "William's told everyone in the village that I've got epilepsy and consumption." "I didn't," said William. "I only told Mrs. Morrison."
"But, William," said his mother,
"why on earth—" "Well, Ethel didn't want to go to the Morrisons tonight. She wanted to go to the Helms."
"I did not," said Ethel. "I was glad to get out of going to the Helms."
"Oh, well, how was I to know? I had to go by what you said, and I had to go by what Robert wrote. I wanted to help. I've took no end of trouble, living a life of self-denial and service all day without stopping once. Instead of being grateful and happy and admiring,
I must say I simply can't understand why you've been doing this, William," said Mrs. Brown.
"We must wait till your father comes in and see what he makes of it.
And I can't think why dinner's so late."
"Oh, cook's gone to bed," said William gloomily.
William followed his mother to the kitchen rather than be left to the tender mercies of Ethel and Robert. Mrs. Brown opened the kitchen door. On the empty chicken dish on the floor sat Jumble, William's faithful dog. He was surrounded by chicken bones and looked blissfully happy. In his bedroom, whither he had perforce retired supperless, William surveyed the events of the day. Well, he'd done his best. He'd lived a life of self-denial and service, all right. It was his family who were wrong. They hadn't been happy or grateful or admiring. They simply weren't worthy of a life of self-denial and service. And anyway, how could he have known that it was another Marian, and that Ethel couldn't say what she meant, and that Jumble was going to get in through the kitchen window? That old boy simply didn't know what he was talking about. He could never have tried it himself. Anyway, William had tried it, and he knew all there was to know about a life of self-denial and service. And he was done with it, thank you very much. He was going back to his ordinary kind of life, first thing tomorrow. Downstairs, William's family circle consumed a meal consisting of tinned sardines and stewed pears. They consumed it in a silence broken only by Mr. Brown.
"I suppose there must be quite a heavy vein of insanity somewhere in the family, for it to come out so strongly in William."
And broken by Ethel's indignant, "Epilepsy! Why on earth did he fix on epilepsy?" And broken by Robert's gloomy, "Engaged to be married to her, 24, chained to her for life." Upstairs, the cause of all their troubles sat on the floor in the middle of his bedroom, surrounded by his all-too-frequently called-upon secret store of emergency rations, a half-eaten apple, a very stale bun, the remains of a packet of monkey nuts, and rounded off with half a bar of unwrapped toffee, deliciously covered with pocket fluff. Quite contentedly, he began to eat the fluffy stick of toffee.